I'm Cindy Kelly, and it is Thursday, July 23rd, 2015, and I'm in South Portland, Maine, with Ruth Coffin. My first question is to ask her to tell her name, speak her name, and spell it.
Well, my name is Ruth Coffin, but I go by Ruth E. Coffin when I sign checks, and so that's what my name is today. Ruth, I think everybody knows Ruth Coffin, Coffin, and everybody should know that name too. But I was born an Ulrich. I was Ruth Ulrich, and Ulrich is Ulrich.
Great. All right. Well, if you like, it would be good to know when you were born, if you can tell us.
Yes, I'd like to tell you that. I was born in 1920 and in the Bronx in New York City. The Bronx doesn't look like that these days. I haven't been back, but I know it's kind of part of Harlem, I guess. I don't know that for sure, but it was very, very rural. And my parents were Lutherans, and my mother and my father knew each other from the church, and there was an active young people's group, and they knew each other, and so they didn't court until he had graduated from high school, and then he graduated from the New York University, and he was an accountant. And at that point, he thought he had enough insurance to be able to support a wife, and so he proposed to her. And she had no idea he wanted to marry her, but they had fun together. And that's how it happened. It was a brief courtship because it was right after the war. And he was in the war. I mean, he never had to go overseas. So the war was over just about when he went into it, I think. So he has no battle stories, but we did know that they were married, and in 1919, and I was born the next year in 1920, and my next sister was born 15 months later, and it went on like that for 5 more children, but I'll get to that later if you want to hear all about it. But so this was being born in the Bronx and growing up there, and I do have stories about the things that I can remember. I have vivid memories of those first 5 years, and the first one is very vivid to me because I and my sister visited my grandmother. We lived on one corner of the Bronx on Briggs Avenue, 198th Street. I think it was 198th Street, but that's where we lived. And we lived in an apartment house, and my grandfather owned a butcher shop at the other corner of the house, of the street. And he and his family lived over the butcher shop. So it was an apartment house. And Helen and I, my sister Helen, and I would walk down there most every afternoon and to visit my grandmother. And she knew we were coming, and so she watched out for us. And so when we got to the apartment house, she would throw us a nickel. Each one had a nickel all wrapped up, and it came down, and we could pick the nickel up. And luckily, underneath the apartment house was a drugstore that sold ice cream, and so we had a toot That's what the Germans called an ice cream cone. It's a toot. And so Helen and I had that memory. And then we'd go into the butcher shop and we'd see what was going on in there. And my grandfather would tease us and well, anyway, he'd always be cheerful. And one day, Mother said, "Well, you ask him to do a pound of meat, cut up. No, in one piece, that pound of meat cut up. No, I want a piece of meat cut up. He'll know what I mean." And so we said, "Mother wants a piece of meat, not cut up." And so he said, "Oh, well, I'm the boss here." And so he began filling another order that somebody wanted the meat cut up. And we said, "Oh, she wants it not cut up." And Helen said, "Come, if he doesn't give us what we don't want, we'll go to another door." another door, because she wasn't talking very well. And so we laughed about that, because where would she go? Where would we go to get another piece of meat not cut up? Well, that's one story. I don't know as I've ever told that story to anybody.
That's marvelous.
Yeah. Then another story, before Helen was old enough to come with me, I'd go down all by myself. And one day there was a horse and a delivery wagon, and the horse had his foot on the curb. And I was supposed to walk down the sidewalk with the horse's foot right on the curb where I was going to go, side by side. And I got scared, so I ran home, and I couldn't go that day because I was afraid of the horse. Story number 2. Not much of a story, but what was the other one that I told? Oh, well, nothing about the butcher shop, but I can remember that first Christmas when I was only 18 months old. I had a Christmas present that my uncle gave me, and it was a little set of a muff and a scarf, and it was white fur. And that fur impressed me so much that I remembered it all my life. And I think it's amazing that I had that vivid memory, because we've seen pictures of it, and I had the memory before I saw the pictures, so there. Anyway, I was proud of remembering that too. And maybe now I forget there was one other item that I really had a vivid memory of. So, but it was fun to be with Helen and visit the butcher shop most every day. And then the other memory I have is my mother had her best friend from the church lived nearby, and she was a maiden lady. She had never married. Of course, she wasn't much older than my mother, but Mother was she was anyway 27, I think, when she got married. But she'd come over and take Helen and me and bring us to her house, or she'd just go walking, and she was a great asset to my mother, and we just loved our visits to her home. There was a cuckoo clock there that we have happy memories of, and well, she had other things to entertain us. So that one day, I guess maybe I was, well, it was near the 4 years old. She brought us back. We were there for a long time, and when we got home, close to the apartment house, she said, "There's going to be a surprise for you when you get home." And we went upstairs, and there we saw a baby. So we had a baby sister, and that was the way we got to see the third daughter that my mother had. So there were three of us, and so this was 5 years after. So the next year, my father was he worked for General Electric, and there was somebody told him that there was an opening for a new factory in Bloomfield, New Jersey, that needed someone with his ability for being an accountant. And so he decided that he'd be adventuresome, and he said yes. And this meant that we were leaving the Bronx and moving to Bloomfield, New Jersey, and that involved so many things that my mother was worried, because this meant that they couldn't pay for we had to buy a house, and they couldn't pay for a house, of course, and they were going to have to borrow money. And she'd always been told that you don't borrow, you pay for what you get. So she had that old-fashioned idea, but my father explained to her that this is not really borrowing, it's just investing. And anyway, she did what he wanted her to do. And so we moved to Bloomfield, and we also needed to buy a car. Our life had changed. The place that we bought was a sweet little house with a backyard and a driveway and many neighbors around, but enough for, we had room to play, and the backyard had a seesaw, and it was a fun place to grow up. And one other little incident that shows how I must have been observant when I was 5 years old or thereabouts, because I remember looking up in the sky and seeing Orion's belt, three stars in a row, and evidently Tante Frida or somebody must have told me about this, and because I looked up there and I said, "Oh, the 3 stars! They followed us here to Bloomfield. Isn't that wonderful?" So I think that was my first introduction to astronomy. I had a very ordinary growing up. Family was a loving family. We never were mistreated or anything like that. We just knew that we were loved, but we were never encouraged to be adventuresome. They never took us to a museum or music I think we never traveled. But when I was a good student, and I got top grades, and I was not exactly one of the popular girls. I had my friends, but it was kind of sedate and not very exciting. And when I got to be in a senior, one thing I didn't say in the beginning, that my father was he was very aware of money, and he began to save. Even then, he wanted to save enough money so that he could send all of his children to college, because my mother didn't even graduate from high school. She never went to high school. That was all she needed, they thought. But he was the one who did get a college education, but not like, he didn't stay at home anyway. So I just wanted to find a college that would be far away from home. I wanted to have a whole new life, and I wanted to do it myself. And not that I didn't want the family, but it was just, I just needed some more adventure in life, I guess. So I started talking to people and looking things up. There were nobody helped me very much, except our dentist said, well, I have a daughter who went to Bates College in Lewiston, Maine, and she liked it. And I have a lot of brochures, pictures of it. And so he gave me that. And I looked at this material from Bates College, and I said, that's the one for me. And so I applied. Never had an interview, just applied. I had good grades, and I was accepted, and that began my life. And I just, Bates College was the best thing I had done, and including meeting Frank Coffin. And I guess I have to tell you how we met. Because Jean, my roommate, I had met her. She lived in Connecticut, and I had we had lunch together one day, and so she told me what her mother graduated from Bates College, and she said, and I already know somebody there, and his name is Frank Coffin. And so I thought to myself, well, she's one up on me. She knows somebody and I don't. But anyway, that stuck in my mind. And then when the time came for this freshman week, the first day we were alone, and we were assigned to a dormitory. She said to my roommate said, let's go down and see Mrs. Coffin. So she was the leader, and I followed her, and so wasn't very far away, but that's where Frank grew up, in Lewiston, right on the campus, just down a few houses away. And we knocked on the door and went in, and it was early in the morning, and Frank was having breakfast, and he didn't, he had other things on his mind. He was in charge of the freshman class. He didn't forget that he had met somebody, because 2 or 3 days later, I was walking along, and sure, there he was, coming the opposite direction, and he recognized me. So he said, hi. And I said, hi. That's all. He hadn't really thought much about me, I don't think. And then that weekend, there was a dance. Every day, every Saturday night, there was a dance at Bates College. And of course, I went. And I was eager to meet lots of guys, because I hadn't any boyfriends that I liked at home. I had one, but I didn't like him. I just, he was okay. So anyway, so Frank saw me, and he said, may I have this dance? And I said, of course. And it was the sixth dance, and at Bates, you had to, when you had the sixth dance with someone, that means you could have intermission with her and spend 10 or 15 minutes resting and having something to drink. Not alcohol, of course. Anyway, so I had that with him, and then he also walked the 10-minute, well, just not very far away, 10 minutes maybe, to walk to the dormitory. And that was it. He just liked the idea of me, and he kept at it, and I'm not going to go into the details, but he was very persistent and thinking of things to do, and knowing him, he was always had something crazy to plan on, and I said that, but I wanted to have more choices. I wanted lots of boyfriends, and he had soon got. So, but nobody. So my roommate told him to, oh, take it easy. She wants to have other. She wants to look around a little bit, and so he tried to anyway. He distanced himself, and nobody else came, so I was alone, and so finally there was a dance, and he asked me to go to the dance, and I said to myself, well, I'm going to go to the dance with Frank Coffin, and well, that was it, I think. I mean, we just, not that he's a good dancer, he wasn't, but he knew how to keep time anyway, and use the same step, and it didn't seem to matter to me. So we had a good time. So of course, we danced all the time. I mean, you know, we had other partners, but it was everybody on campus knew that Frank Coffin was well, what's the word? I don't think we use the words they do now, but was interested in Ruth Coffin. I mean, in Ruth Ulrich, and so. And we got interested in each other too. He wasn't romantic. He really wasn't. But I knew what he meant. And so he said, Ruth, I think I love you. To me, that meant he wanted to marry me. Can you believe that? And that's what happened. But we didn't get married until 4 years later, when I was about to graduate, after I graduated. So we had the whole 4 years of college, except he went to Harvard Law School. He was 2 years ahead of me, so he went to Harvard Law School. But we saw each other a lot then. He'd come home, and I'd go down, and so we had a courtship.
And by this time, you were all in.
I was what?
You were an enthusiastic partner in this.
In
the courtship.
Oh yes. Oh, I returned that declaration of love, which meant yes, I'll marry you. You know, he never said, "Will you marry me?" But he gave me a ring when I graduated, which we could say we were engaged, but we were just made for each other. I get emotional about it because it was so perfect. And then we had to cope with the war.
It wasn't all perfect, was it, Mother?
What?
It wasn't all perfect, was it?
Oh, it was.
It was.
Well,
yes.
no, what do you mean perfect?
Well, what did he? You told us stuff about. I mean, you said he did crazy things.
He did do crazy things.
What did you think about that when you were courting?
Well, I said he does crazy things. He acts out. He was a.
Yes.
He tried to do strange things like climb the telephone pole, and when we saw a movie that was a kind of a gangster movie, he got out and he pretended to be a gangster and shoot people. Anyway, and I didn't like that, but you know what? That didn't mean I didn't like him. I just didn't like some of his pranks. And I think the law clerks maybe know about some of these pranks. I think it's still in his nature to think of crazy things to do.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about his childhood, and maybe is there something about his childhood that made him a prankster, made him who he was, or?
That's a good question. I think his mother was a prankster in a way. I think, well, I should tell about him because his mother and father were divorced, and in those days that was a very serious thing. But she graduated from Bates, and she hadn't, as far as I know. I mean, first of all, she was very close-mouthed of talking about. That isn't a good way of saying it. She was very, Nancy.
She just didn't share. She didn't
Yeah.
talk about personal things.
Yeah, she didn't. She just never. I figure that the marriage did not work, and she must have been a prankster herself because the man she married was very fun-loving, and I can see how they had a great time together. But when it came to serious things, well, she had a very hard delivery when Frank was born, and I wouldn't be surprised if she felt that this married life is not for her. But she just loved her son, and so that's the way he grew up. He saw his father once in a while on visits, and he told me that he never, he doesn't remember his father at their home where he grew up. He just doesn't remember doing anything with his father. Only after they were divorced, and he'd come and take him for an afternoon on a weekend, and he'd take him to a gym and have him practice boxing. And then he'd try to get him interested in baseball. And Frank, should I refer to him as the judge, or just, he's still Frank then, isn't he? And he was not interested in baseball or boxing, and so he tolerated it. So so he didn't get to know his father. It was forced. So pretty soon he didn't come anymore. And so he just grew up without a father. So he grew up with his mother, who doted on him, and he did have a grandfather and the grandmother, and they lived close by, and so they were part of the family. He doesn't remember all that much about his grandfather. He has memories, and they were all, and I think his grandfather died when he was 13, so he didn't know him as a teenager, but his grandfather was a lawyer, a very successful lawyer in Lewiston. And, well, there's a lot.
Was he also a politician?
He was a politician. He basically wasn't a politician but he was elected to the House Representatives. And he
was Speaker.
He was Speaker of the House, wasn't he?
And Mayor of Lewiston.
And the mayor. I guess he was.
I guess it sounds like a politician.
Yes, he was. He was a politician. Oh, yes, he was. And even his grandmother was elected but I don't think she was a politician. She was an entertainer. She would give. She was a member of the Grange, and that was a social group, and she would give. She would make stories up or read stories, readings she called them, and so she was an entertainer.
She sounded like a real character.
She was a character. Well, they both were characters. They both. The interesting thing about his growing up was that he had a mother and a grandmother who loved to have fun, and they were always thinking of things to do. When Grammy Ruth realized that his eyes were set on me and me only, she realized that probably this was serious. Of course, we didn't tell her about our plans to get married, but she assumed it. But she wouldn't say it. She was very formal, and she would talk a lot about the future, and she said, as though I weren't in the picture at all. The way she treated him was that she wanted what was best for him, but she wanted to have a little part in making what was best for him happen. And an example of that was that she wrote to the dean of the law school and said she had a son who was very smart and was going to apply, and she hoped that he'd think well of him.
Now, there was one thing talking about how she liked to kind of make sure what she wanted to happen was that she bought Frank 1935 Ford Coupe. So what do you suppose that was about?
When was that?
Well, while he was in college,
Yeah.
he did have a car, and that was a rare thing for anyone in college those days. They didn't have cars, so he was we had a lot of friends that remember him. Even in the car, one day he had the car, and he drove it right on the campus for fun, and that was naughty.
Over the grass? Or
Yep.
where
No,
you
no,
were?
on the sidewalk.
On the sidewalk.
Yeah, on the sidewalk.
And
yeah.
I'm not part of this, but
I
we
need
grew
help.
up in Lewiston, and we would go for walks on the campus, and there's a little stencil on every path, no motor vehicles allowed on this path. And we were sure it was because he had driven a car on those paths.
Well, I'm sure he wasn't the only one, but
Do you remember, did he get in trouble for this?
no, everybody loved him on campus. He nobody gave him an A. The professors all thought he was brilliant, and they encouraged him, and he got straight A's, and he felt that he could do no wrong. Everybody thought he could do no wrong.
So
So you can imagine how I felt that this superhero of the Bates College class of 1940 was interested in little old me from Bloomfield, New Jersey. But it wasn't the only thing about my career in Bates, because I made wonderful girlfriends, and we just had a very, very fun time. And all of my girlfriends found their husbands at Bates. And so we became, it was not unusual to find a husband at college in those days. And we all did. And there weren't many divorces either. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I think there are too many choices today.
Yeah, wow. Tell us about what you were studying.
Oh, well, I wanted to know about everything. And I can remember, not that I studied religion, but I do remember that first religion class. I grew up as a Lutheran, and I was very tied to that because I thought I should be that Lutheran beliefs, and they were kind of. And I went to a confirmation class, and I can remember hearing things that minister told that I just couldn't believe were true about angels in heaven and Jesus dying. Dr. Zerby, who was the religion teacher, he just opened my eyes one day when he said that, talking about Jesus, he said the Apostles' Creed, where you have to swear, I believe in God the Father, God the Son, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. And he said that comma is the only important thing about Jesus. And didn't matter about any of the rest of it, that it's what he preached and taught and influenced his apostles and how that word spread. And that made a big difference in my feeling about religion. And I have that feeling.
So afterwards, how did you feel?
I opened my eyes, and I feel that I don't have to be a Lutheran anymore. I can be a Baptist if I want to, and so I did go to the Baptist church, which was a very liberal church. Nobody tried to tell me about angels, and anyway.
Is that the church that the Coffins went to?
Yes, and so did a lot of the Bates College professors, the administration, yeah, and the students. That was really the church that they went to.
So they were far more free-spirited in terms of interpreting the Bible. Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing that happened going to that church was we had a minister that married us and who had been there for a long time, resigned, and they had to find another minister, which they did, and I forget what his name was, but then that person left, and then the second minister, or maybe it was the third, was Bob Towner, who was the kind of a person that our family and his family just grew to care about each other. And they were the best friends we had in Lewiston, and the children played with each other. They were girls, and they played with Nancy, well, mostly Nancy. And we were close friends. And when he left, and he was restless. He was a young man, and he thought he could go further than Lewiston, Maine. And so he left us, and I thought to myself, oh, we'll never see him again. But you know what? They came back every year to Maine, and the organist of the church that we were going to owned a house on Bailey Island near Harpswell, part of Harpswell, and they used that cottage, and then we've seen them just about every summer. Coming to Lewiston from Bloomfield, New Jersey, was such a change of scenery that I still can't get over it in a way, because I had never known that the ocean could be like it is. I'm looking out right now. Of course, I don't see anything, but but I know it's all there. And when I lived in Bloomfield with my family, the only ocean we knew were the beaches on Long Island, like Long Beach, and that's where we would go for in the summertime. And we never stayed overnight. I used to think, why can't we stay overnight and not have to get up the next morning and pack a lunch again and go down for another day? And but my father was counting his pennies and saving money, and so he couldn't afford, he says, whatever it would cost to rent a little cottage. So here I'm into this family which not only has a cottage, but one that was in the family anyway. This cottage at South Harpswell was part of a, well, you know, that first time he took me down, it wasn't that it wasn't the cottage that attracted me. I think it was the terrain, the going down that that little road from Lewiston, and then ending up, as we got closer and closer to the water. That was when I realized that the ocean didn't have to be rollers that you had to jump into and get beyond before you can go swimming. But here was this relatively calm piece of water that was also the ocean. And no sandy beach, just pebbly beach. It was so different. And I was charmed by it. I liked the houses that we passed. I liked the terrain. I loved every bit of it. And it just so happened that Frank loved it too, and he wanted me to know what he loved. Well, when his grandfather died, his mother and his grandmother inherited the cottage, and they inherited a farm that he owned in Virginia, and I don't know why he did that, but that's what he did. And then I don't know how much money it was, but they thought they had lots of money. They had never been in charge of the finances, and they just thought there was money there, and so they just spent money. And one thing they wanted to do for Frankie, they called him Frankie, was to give him a boat. I majored in sociology, and it was kind of a new topic then. It wasn't the most popular major, but I was drawn to that, and I did some going into the, I guess it was I haven't thought about it for a while now, but I did some field work with somebody who was head of the child welfare department of Maine, and got. Anyway, that was my name, my major. And then I had a choice when I was going to be a senior. My grades were good, but they weren't brilliant. I mean, they were brilliant enough, I mean, smart enough for me to be, I had the offer of, instead of a course, when I'm a senior, I could do a thesis, and that would be counted as a course. And so that's what I chose to do, and I chose the subject of the family. And I dutifully read a lot about the different kinds of families, and I read about the Chinese and the Margaret Mead. I wrote about the American family too, and I don't know whether it was very deep or not, but something about it. When the time came to deliver the thesis, well, Frank helped me too. You know, he was interested in what I was doing, even though he was at Harvard at that time. But anyway, then I had to defend the thesis. It's just like having a PhD. It's a thesis, only it was a simple one. And but evidently they liked it, because when I got my degree, it was magna cum laude. How about that?
Now, reading the volume, 3-volume history that Frank Coffin wrote, he said that in late summer 1940 that I decided today that I want to be a judge in a high court somewhere, because a judgeship is a meeting ground of theory and practical application. I'm anxious to get to work and see what stuff I am made of. Do you remember him talking this way?
No, I never heard him talk about being a judge. I don't. Did he say that in his memoirs?
This is late summer 1940, so he's...
Oh, that's when he graduated. He graduated. Well, I know he was very thorough in putting things down on paper, and when he knew that when he graduated, he would have to make a decision about what his career would be, and so he wrote it down: a teacher, a minister. I don't think he had businessman down there, but he had the law down there. And of course his mother wanted him to be a lawyer, and his grandfather had been a lawyer, and I think everyone thought that that's what he would be doing. But he had to go through the process of making sure that he didn't really want to be a minister or an educator.
Journalist, I think.
Journalist, yeah. But I don't remember him ever saying he wanted to be a judge, because I remember when he first, going way ahead, when he was first mentioned, we were overseas. We were in Paris, France, when his name was being mentioned to fill the place of the opening. And Bailey Aldrich was the only judge. One of them died and the other one was sick, and they hadn't appointed any newcomers. And so for a whole year, Bailey was the only judge on the First Circuit Court of Appeals. So then we were in Paris, and we only heard by telephone and letters and how it was going. And when he realized that he was being mentioned to take the place, to be on the Circuit Court of Appeals, he he hadn't planned on that because he'd been a politician, and so this was new to him. But maybe he had said that. We would have probably was in his notes, but we never talked about it. So I think it was just an idea. And anyway, he had forgotten it because then he said, a judge. He hadn't thought about being a judge. I mean, that's the way I heard it. So he couldn't have taken it that seriously. I've never heard him mention it until it was proposed.
Did he get excited about it?
Awed. I think he was awed because I think he respected the judiciary so much, and then he got to thinking about it and realizing that he would be his own boss and he would be able to write opinions, make a difference. And it was for life, security. There were many good things about being a judge, besides doing a good job.
Now we're going to jump back to he's gone off to Harvard Law School.
Yes.
That sounded good, but
Yeah.
it's 1941.
Yes. There's a war on, and he knows that there'll be, we'll get into it, we weren't into it, but he knew that we would, and that he better be prepared. And so he did finish 1 year of law school, and I must say, I don't know whether he said this in his memoirs or not, but when the end of the term came, he did not make law review. And, you know, I felt he never expressed it to me. He never said, this is a big disappointment, but it really, he had been so, everything had been so easy for him. He had straight A's, everybody loved him, and he was clever and humorous and popular. And here he was up against, at Harvard Law School, he had the best of minds, and they evidently, well, whatever happened, he didn't make the law review. But that didn't mean anything, did it? He made his way, and
So-
he made a name for himself.
Yeah, he sure did. Now, tell us about, I'd like to know about your honeymoon, because that sounds like a good story there.
Oh yes, that's.
Tell us when you were married,
Oh, we were.
what the day was.
Yeah. Well, we well,
Tell us about your wedding.
the wedding, we wanted to be married as soon as possible. My father thought that you don't get married unless you have an income, and he wouldn't have approved if it hadn't been for the war and Frank hadn't enlisted, and then he could get married. But I don't think they would have prevented us because they knew we were going to get married one way or the other. The sooner the better, we felt, after I had graduated and I had gotten a job. I had trained to be a social worker for the state child welfare, and I had been assigned to a preparatory prepare for it, in Augusta, and I was there with some friends who were also doing the same thing, and we had a nice time in Augusta, learning how to be a child welfare uh, worker. And so I learned my lessons, and I was dutiful, but my heart wasn't in it. My heart was with Frank, and he was in Boston, and I went down there as often as I could, and we finally said, "There's nothing to stop us from getting married now," and everybody was doing it, and so we did plan it, and we knew that, and by this time he had enlisted, and we didn't know what the future would be, and we thought we'd better just get the wedding over with. It's about the way we thought about it. And unlike Harpswell, who wanted a big wedding, and how, anyway. So I didn't care what kind of a wedding I had. I just wanted to get married. And so, but we knew that Grammy Ruth would appreciate having her only son be married at Bates and in Lewiston, and so that was the place that we were going to do it. And so we knew who we'd have, Pastor Vernon, who's our minister, and we knew where we were going to do it, at the church, at the chapel of Bates, and then we were going to invite all of Grammy's friends, and she would love this. And then we began getting wedding gifts, and it was a real wedding. But my heart wasn't in it. It wasn't. I just wanted to beat it. I thought it was all a show. Isn't that awful to feel that way?
You were.
I was doing it for her.
And what was the date? Tell us
December 19th,
right.
1942, yeah. My heart wasn't in it, and I think we both felt that way. We had to do this in order to be married, and for Grammy Ruth. But my poor family, they had to come from Bloomfield, New Jersey, and it was the middle of winter, and it was 20 degrees below zero out there, and we had to go through a wedding. And so my father and mother came, and my young brother and my little sister, they were just children, and they came, and my siblings, well, they were all there. Yeah, and they were bridesmaids, and I had a wedding dress, and I had a formal portrait taken of me in this wedding dress. And what else did I do? You could see my heart was not in all the trimmings, but I knew it was good for Grammy Ruth, and I got a lot of presents. They mostly were duplicates, but some were good.
And wasn't your father sick?
And my father wasn't feeling well. He had a cold, and it was no favor to him to come, but he had to do it. His fruits, it was for me, and so he did it. And then Grace had hurt her leg on playing basketball or something, and her leg was in a bandage, and so she wasn't feeling very well. And Art was just a little boy, and my sister Helen had just had a baby. She got married before I did, and I was jealous. And she had a baby, and she left that child when he was only 2 months old to come to my wedding, which was she was worried about that. And And Muriel, I think, must have come from somewhere. Uh, she was still at Bates, and so they were there. And we had a reception at the DeWitt Hotel, which was the only hotel that would serve, I guess. And there was no dancing, no singing, and we had to find, my sisters could stand up for me, be bridesmaids. That was no problem, but we had to find three gentlemen for Frank and his, he had to find his roommate. He called his roommate and from college, and that's Earl Ziegler, and he was best man, and then there were four others, friends people he knew, but it wasn't his best friends because it was wartime, and then we had a reception after the wedding in the chapel of Bates College. We had a reception. We greeted our guests out in the foyer, and it was so cold that everybody was eager to get out of there and get home and be in the warmth of their home. And so we had, I did have a wrap, but I was cold. Everybody was cold. And finally, the wedding was over, and then we went back to Wood Street where the house was, Frank's house, and we changed our clothes. And everybody, this is all formal. And I wanted to do everything proper because that's what I was supposed to do. And so I got all dressed up as though I were going to a hotel in Boston. But we couldn't afford a hotel in Boston, and nobody was willing to pay for it for us. So the only offer we had to go for our wedding night was a farmhouse in Leeds. But our minister owned a farmhouse, but of course he only used it in the summertime, and so he went out and put a fire in so it would warm up a little bit at noon, but of course it still was very cold, and so we went. We have a picture of me with a hat and gloves and dressed silk stockings. I was ready to be seen in the nightclubs of Boston, and all I did was to go to this farmhouse and get cold. And it was so cold that we couldn't. The only room we could use was where there was a fire.
Wood stove. Was it a
Wood stove, yeah. So, however, we managed, and we had we spent most of the time cutting wood to replace the wood that we burned. We'd hated to use up all the wood for Dr. Vernon for the next summer, and then we decided we'd go home a little early, so we went back early, and then we were comfortable, and then it was lovely, and it was not snowy out, but it was very cold, and so the road was just a farm, just a single path almost, and it was icy, not snowy, and I said, "Oh, Frank, aren't you doing well?" And just about when I said that, he skidded off the road, and his front wheels went into the gutter on this side, and the rear wheels were there, and here we were in the middle of nowhere on our wedding night and it couldn't have been worse. It couldn't have been worse, but it wasn't that bad because we looked ahead and we could see some lights. There was a house beyond, and so we went. We couldn't do anything, so we went up to this house, knocked on the door, and inside there was an old woman and 3 strong men. And we said, "We're stuck and we have to get help. And what do we do?" I mean, I forget what we said, but we were very pitiful. And so they said, "Oh, we can do it." So they put on their clothes, these great big heavy farm boys, and they went down and they jiggled it, and sure enough, they got it back on the track. And so, can you think of anything worse on a wedding night?
And it was really, really cold.
It was really, really cold.
That was dangerous.
And that fireplace, if it had any heat, it was gone. So we started a fire we had to work hard, but we had a nice toasty bedroom anyway. We were married in December, and he didn't leave until till Thanksgiving, November. And so we had 9 months that we could live together as a married couple. And this is what we wanted. And so I could go with him and where he was stationed, and so it was a interesting life. That is, when he became an ensign, after he'd done his studies, his first appointment was to Portsmouth. And so we lived in Portsmouth for about 4 months, and then he was moved to someplace in Florida. And that was the first time I'd ever been south of Atlantic City in my life. An experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so we found a little place, in somebody's home, and he was I guess it was an air I forget what it was there, but he stayed there maybe two months maybe, and then he was moved to South Florida, and there's where we met. We met friends, but it was just one place to another, and then I think the next place was Rhode Island, and we thought, oh, maybe this is where he's going to be permanently. Ha ha ha. They were just pushing him around because they didn't know what to do with him. But finally, he was sent to Hoboken, New Jersey, and that's where he was commissioned. They finally decided that he would be stationed to a merchant. It was a merchant vessel that was being reconditioned to be USS Air. What it was an airplane. A ship devoted to parts for the airplanes in the war, and so USS Supply, the name. It was going to see. I'm not saying
That's
it's
the name, USS Supply.
Supply,
Yep.
yeah. And he was assigned to the USS Supply in Hoboken, New Jersey, and he and I think 2 or 3 other military people were aboard, but the rest were all the merchant Marines. They were sailing their vessel to Hawaii to be commissioned into the USS Supply, and so that was what his job was, and so, but he was every day. So we stayed with my parents in New Jersey, and every morning he'd go to the boat and come back, and then this went on for about a week, and finally on Thanksgiving Day, in November, he went, and that was it. And so I knew, we knew it would be a long time, and it was. And so I took a deep breath and said, I'll get through this. And we, thank goodness for writing letters, and we did. And we wrote, I'd forgotten how many we wrote, but we saved them all, and we've been reading them. And I'm really proud of my letters. Don't you think so, Meredith, Nancy? Yeah, I mean, I guess I did a good job. And that's all I had to do. But staying with my parents, I had to find something to do, so I volunteered. I think it was a volunteer, I don't know what it was. I was with a child welfare group of children, taking care of them. And my heart wasn't in it. I didn't know what to do with kids. And so I just didn't stay with that job very long. So so I went to the cottage for the summer anyway. And then what else? And it was nice to be with Grammy Ruth and Grammy Maud, and they welcomed me in the cottage, and we had a good time for this summer. And then next year, it was in the fall, I had a telephone call from Mrs. Meerman, who was the wife of one of my professors, and she knew my background, that I was a child welfare worker, and she thought maybe I'd be good for a job that was opening up in Lewiston, and that was with the Red Cross. And I was going to be the Home Service Secretary of the Red Cross, the American Red Cross in Lewiston. And I had a uniform, and I said, sure, because I had no other plans. And so that was a lifesaver in a way. It was brought an income, and I did a lot of good work. It wasn't difficult, but I did it, and I can, living with Grammy Ruth and Grammy Maud was an experience, and we got along real well, and we talked about Frankie, and I had some friends, so it worked out. So my lifeline was the letters that we wrote, and I wrote more frequently than he did, and he didn't write as long a letter as most of my girlfriends whose husbands were overseas had simple little letters, and well, I tried to console myself that that mine were not as frequent, but they were full. And it is true, knowing Judge Coffin, you can imagine how he wrote about in great detail what he was doing for the boat. And one of the things that they did while they were being reconditioned, they had to clean the inside of the boat and make it spick and span and other things, and there wasn't much else to do. So they thought of, I hope it was something Frank thought of, but maybe it was just a group thinking of it. But he was the director. They put on a show, and he thought up the texts, the little incidents. They were kind of silly, but they were very laughable, and he wrote all about this. And he said, at the end, he said, and it was a wonderful experience to stand at the back of this great big room, I guess it was, where the cargo was going to go. And he said, and to have people laugh at the jokes that he had made up and put into the script. And so he said that was a treat. And so he was happy doing that. And then that took quite a while. So he was there for almost the rest of the year. I forget when he set sail, but finally it was commissioned, and they sailed to the South Pacific. And so I have many letters from the South Pacific and stories of how it was on the boat, on the ship, I should say. And I wrote back to him, not much to say, but I somehow filled those letters with the little things that he wanted to hear. So I think it's a good correspondence we had. Finally, he was relieved of his duty, but he couldn't leave until his replacement came. And so I think he was relieved of duty, and this is 2 years later. He was, but we waited and we waited and we waited, and I think that person who was supposed to take his place deliberately got lost so that he didn't have to go. I don't know what it, but anyway, it took him a long time to arrive, but finally he arrived at the boat, at the ship, and Frank was free to come home. This was in the fall of 47?
45.
45? Yeah, he's gone 2 years.
Well, that's...
And I was home. I had given up my job because I didn't know when he was coming home, but I mean, when he'd get there, but I knew he was coming. And so I had gone home to be with my parents, and that's where I was waiting for him. And finally, finally, he came.
And then what did you do then?
Then this was just before Christmas, and we went back to Portland, to Lewiston for Christmas. No, I guess I had Christmas home. I don't know what it meant. But anyway, of course we wanted to get to see Grammy Ruth too. So that was, and then what to do? Well, he knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to finish law school.
Was that easy to do, to just go right back into school?
Oh, yes, yeah. And we had to find a place to stay in Boston, and so we found a place. It was housing for the Harvard students' housing complex, and this was the first time I'd ever kept house, because I had helped my mother, I guess, and Grammy Ruth didn't need help. She didn't offer it, and I didn't help her cook. But I was a novice. I hadn't learned how to cook. I made mistakes. That surprised me that I couldn't put on a meal, but I learned the hard way. And my sister Helen came to see me, and she came for lunch, and I didn't think, oh, what do I have to do for lunch now? And I didn't know what to do. And she said, well, do you have a store around? And I said, yes. And she said, well, why don't we go up and get a can of tuna fish, and we'll make sandwiches. So that was the first time I entertained anybody. Funny, isn't it?
That's great.
And I had another experience. I invited one of his professors. Now, when was that? Somebody to have tea, or I don't think it was a meal even, but I made a cake. And I went to the store, and I I had the recipe, and it said baking powder. And I looked, and I didn't know that baking powder is always double acting baking powder. And I said, oh, this is double acting, so I only need to use half. And so that was another learning experience. So that was the beginning of my homemaking. And this was a time when one day, this is Shaler Lane where we lived, we had knock on the door, and there was a woman, and she said, Frank Coffin, I'm your cousin. And she had known about Frank, and well, I knew who he was because Frank's mother never said anything about the other side of his family. In other words, his father had a family too, and so this was this was the daughter of Frank's father's brother, his uncle, and she and her husband became dear friends over the years, and also his sisters, the husband, his father had a brother and a sister, and so this was the sister who was married to a person named Callback, and they had a full family and happy family, and we enjoyed their company very much, and those cousins that he found within that family remained close friends until they died. So it was an enriching experience to find cousins that he never knew he had. When we were in college, one of the things that he did to Courtney was to invite me to dinner at the local hotel, and that was something unusual at Bates. You didn't usually do that, but this was special, and so I felt he really wants me, doesn't he? You know, this was great, and we got to talking, and he told me how his mother and father were divorced, and how he saw him once in a while when they were growing up, and he has no memory of ever having him in the house. But so he said, and he lives here. He's running the cafeteria in the sugar company, and he knew about his father, but he had no interest in looking him up after he had come back. No, this was in college, yeah. And so I encouraged him, and I said, you know, he's your father, and why don't, things are different now. You're not a little boy, and so he decided that he'd go and see his father. And so he did one day, and of course his father was delighted that he made the overture. And so we got to know, this is when we were living in Lewiston, and so we got to know him, and we found out that he has a brother, and the brother is 15 years younger than Frank, and 15 years older than Douglas. So he's right in between, and Douglas has become very fond of Jack, the brother, and well, we all were. And so that was another dimension that opened up. So life was getting more interesting.
Yeah, how did he decide what he was going to do after he graduated from law school? What did he consider?
Oh, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, he of course considered. He interviewed some big firm in Boston. I forget which one it was, But his heart was not in that. I think he did that perfunctorily, and he really wanted to come back to Lewiston and be a lawyer, a real lawyer. And so that's what we were planning to do. So that's what we did. And that's when Nancy was 3 months old, and we put her in the car. There were no such things as car seats in those days. She was in her cradle, and it could have fallen off the back seat easily, but we went very slowly. And Grammy Ruth had found a house for us, or Grammy Maud said, well, that house is for sale, and it's only $10,000, and it's right close by, and you should have it. And so we had it, and I said fine, and so we went to 26 Mountain Avenue, and that's where Nancy. She wasn't the only one that was born in Boston. The others were born in Maine. And that began life together.
And when did the clerkship come into the picture?
Oh, Grammy Maud, she also helped he had help from his family. Grammy Maud said, Judge Clifford is a new judge, and for the first time, they are allowed to have a law clerk, and he would like to know whether you'd like to be his law clerk. This is Grammy Maud.
Maud,
Yeah.
not Grammy Ruth, Grammy
This
Maud.
was Grammy Maud who did that, yeah. And so that, I mean,
That was
that was wonderful because Judge Clifford he was a brand new judge, federal judge, and he didn't know what to do any more than Frank did. So the two of them worked it all out together, and I think he probably got his first feelings of what it's like to be a judge working for him. And the one thing I remember is that he wasn't very busy. I don't think they had much to do, and so he was sent to New York City to help out in a trial. And I don't remember what it was, but he went down there for I don't think it was for very long, but New York City, and I thought that was great because I had Douglas now and Nancy, and I could go home to my parents and have a nice visit with them. And so Frank went to New York City every day and did what he was supposed to do for Judge Clifford, and I can remember Mother babysat, and we went to New York City just to have a nice dinner all by ourselves, which was a treat. And so we went to some hotel dining room and had a beautiful meal, and I described it in detail, and I said, and it only, it was so expensive. We spent $17 on that. Can you imagine two meals? But this was a learning experience for him because he put everything he had into. He joined the Elks Club and the Kiwanis, and he wanted to be known. He wanted to build up his practice, and he was fortunate because he was given a lawyer who was in town, who had been a lawyer in town, had gone to be in charge of the Poland Spring House in Poland Spring, and so he didn't have time for his practice at home, but he had an office with his secretary, and he was still keeping that office with the secretary, and it just cried to have a lawyer in the back room, and so he said, would you like to take over the office for me? And so it was, I think he gave it to him.
Which lawyer was that?
is it
That
Fred
wasn't Ralph.
Lancaster?
Frank Lancaster, yeah. Ralph
Ralph
Lancaster.
Lancaster.
Ralph,
Ralph Lancaster.
yeah.
Oh.
And he had been Grammy Ruth's lawyer too,
Ah.
but I don't. Anyway, he did that, and so then he just got to, then we made friends. That's when he met Shep Lee, and but I got into politics. He made speeches all his life. He was on the debating. He was taught in high school. He was on the debating team, and in college he was a debater also, and he was good at it. He could argue, and he had facts, and he was a great. He was an orator. He loved to give speeches. He had a way with words, and he prepared every speech he had, every one of them. And so, what was that leading up to?
So that sort of got him involved in politics in Maine.
Oh yes, that's what happened. He was making speeches on many subjects. He felt he acted as though he knew a lot about everything, and people looked up to him and thought of him when they needed speeches, and so he one of his subjects was how the Democrats in Maine were weak. They didn't have any organization to help them become more powerful, and they didn't put up candidates that were getting elected, and most intelligent people who had leanings to be Democrats were enrolled as a Republican just so that they'd have something to say about the primary. That was what I was told. And so he made sure that everybody knew he was in town. Frank was making lots of speeches, and people were noticing him, including the Democratic Party, and they thought it was a good idea if he could be of help to the Democratic Party, and so they put. And of course, Frank thought so too, but he didn't think he could play a part. He just made speeches about it. And Don Nickel, who was alert, and he was working for the paper, or was at the radio station. He was employed, and he became friends. They became friends, and he said, "Frank, you can't just make speeches. You've got to do something." And so he encouraged him to do it. And so he decided that, well, maybe he should. And so he decided to, without his knowing it, I know, he offered to do the platform for the next political meeting. The chairman of the Democratic Party announced one day that that Frank Coffin was going to make the platform.
Okay.
Is that it? And he hadn't been asked, and he was miffed. He said, "Nobody has a right to pronounce that I was going to do something when I haven't told him yes." And so I know I had to calm him down then and say, "Well, this is what you wanted anyway. Don't be, just forget that it wasn't done correctly and just be grateful that he wants you." And so he decided, yes, I guess he will, because he loved to do things like that. So he wrote out the best platform that the Democrats had had in a long, long time. and then he got other people to help him do things. Don Nickel said the first thing you need to do is to have your own headquarters and not just do it from your office. And so they did decide to rent a place, and Don Nickel decided to give up. They raised money. They didn't raise much, but they raised enough so that Don could be paid for a couple of months anyway. And I remember that Hilda was dismayed when he said he was going to give up his job that paid good money and raise it for the Democratic Party. But that's what he did. He sacrificed and helped him do what he was supposed to do, what he wanted to do. So the two of them together worked hard, and they visited people who were Democrats in heart, even though they hadn't voted that way. And these included important people in the community, like the president of Bowdoin, and I think most college presidents. I'm not sure about Bates, but anyway. So they just worked hard. And
the result was?
The result was, then they had to, let's see.
Who won the race for governor?
Well, Muskie did, but they never thought that he was going to win because they'd only started, but they did all of this over 5 or 6 months, and they didn't have anybody to run for Congress, so they had to get people to do that, and for what else
is there a
is
senator seat?
Senator, yeah. And so they put up a full calendar, a full ballot. What is the word?
Slate.
Slate, a full slate, and they did. I should tell you how Frank and Doug and Med Muskie met, because they knew each other. They both were Bates graduates, but they really weren't friendly, and they didn't live in the same community, and so I think Muskie was the one who knowing that Frank was working with the Democratic Party, thought it was time that they met each other and talked it over and see what they could do together. And so he invited us to their camp on a lake.
China Lake.
Yeah. And so I can remember that visit. Not that I was in on the talking, but they decided that they were going to work together and see if they could do something to build up the Democratic Party. And Ed Muskie had a bad fall when he was painting or doing something in his house, and he fell down the stairs and hurt his back, and he was in a cast of some kind. When Frank was sworn in as a congressman, and it was a big event, and I wanted to go, and so I asked Hilda whether she would take care of the children while I drove the car and went down to be there when Frank was sworn in as a new congressman. And so that happened, and it was thrilling, and I was eager to get back, pick up my children from Hilda's house, and so we got into the car, and we were on our way home, going through the intersection where two roads went in separate ways, and double lanes, and I was in the middle of the road, and I wanted to go right, but I wasn't in the right lane, but I went anyway, and I was pulled over by a policeman
A
because
Maryland policeman.
yeah,
He was
because I was in the wrong lane, and he was the one who had to evade me, and it couldn't have been worse.
Oh.
And he was mean. I think he was mean. Instead of just giving me a ticket, he had me come to the office.
The station.
Station. Yeah.
Yeah. With all four children in the
and
car.
I had 4 children in the
Screaming.
car, and I said, you know, I'm a congressman's wife, and I'm not used to this, and at home we didn't have 2 lanes like this, and, you know, I acted like an utter fool, I suppose. And I don't know whether he wanted to be mean or what, but he took me into the station, and I was in tears, and all of you children were crying, and I don't think they didn't care, and I really don't know how it ended.
And then you had to pay a fine or something?
I don't know how it ended.
Yeah.
But they must have somehow agreed that we could have a ticket and we pay. But not before we were in utter disarray.
Oh, dear. That's hard to forget.
Yes,
That would be hard to forget.
yes. And that was my introduction to living in Washington.
Wow.
Oh, however,
So did Frank like his role as a congressman?
oh, he loved it. Yes, he put everything he had into in being the best congressman that he knew how to be, and of course he had letters home, and he made speeches, and he worked well with the other congressmen, and we got to know them all, and it didn't matter whether they were Republicans or Democrats. Some of his best friends were Republicans, the ones from Boston. They were Republicans. He did make friends with the Republicans. It was bipartisan through and through. And then he had the achievements, the things that he paid attention to. What he liked to do was to do something thoroughly. And one of the first things he did was do a study of our relationship with Canada. And so he was on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and so he made an outline of, it was a report on Canadian relationships. He went overseas. I mean, he went to Europe, to wherever the common market was, and had interviews and studies, and so he was, yeah. So he was very, very content, very happy as a congressman, because he was doing things that he knew what to do about, or at least wanted to learn about.
So it seems that now he has 4 children, and he's off in Europe, or he's working late, night after night in the Congress, and somebody's got to keep the whole family together. Now, who was that?
Well, I wonder.
I wonder how you did it.
Well, I just did it. I think the children were happy in Washington. Susan was the one that I had to pay most attention to, because she needed a babysitter when I went out, and I had things that I liked to do too. I became very good friends with Eleanor McGovern, because George McGovern was elected at the same time um, Frank was, and they were, well, they lived in Maryland, which was on the way, not far away from where we lived, and one thing I did was to join the Democratic Women's Club, and that was a very, I don't know whether we had to, I guess I just joined, or maybe you had to be asked, I'm not sure. Anyway, I joined the Democratic Women's Club, and Eleanor McGovern and I would go together to their meetings, and it was a great opportunity to meet people, speakers, like Eleanor Roosevelt was there, and I know, and also other famous people. We had wonderful experiences. One of the things that I do think is kind of exciting. One afternoon, Eleanor and I were invited. We all were. I mean, it was a big party, but all the Democrats were invited to the Queen of England's birthday party. There was a big reception, and we were invited to meet the King and Queen of England, and then have a reception afterwards. So Eleanor and I went together, and I think Susan was in school by then, because or maybe I got a babysitter for her. But anyway, it's a vivid memory of being in this reception room and seeing the row of people who were about to greet the Queen go like that, and I was here and over there with like that. Nobody can see that, on a tape. But anyway, I watched the others greeting the Queen and geared myself up to what I would say or do when I had my turn to greet the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth. And so I finally got there, and I didn't want to curtsy. Other people curtsied, but I just kind of nodded my head and looked as though I'm honoring you. And I don't think I know what I said, but I said, "This is a pleasure," probably. And she greeted me too. And then I greeted the husband, the prince, and well, it was not exactly a thrill, but it was something important, and I felt that I was being well treated. And then we went out, Eleanor and I, and we could have joined the group where they were milling around having little tasty bits of things to eat. But school was getting out, and so we had to go home and get our children. So we couldn't stay for the whole time, but just greeting the Queen was a very memorable occasion. It's one of the outstanding memories of being in Washington. There were a lot of them. So this was an important occasion, whether it was because after he was defeated as governor, running for governor, he stayed on because Kennedy won, and you know all about that. Kennedy won, and he wanted to know what he wanted to use Frank in his administration, and Frank didn't want to do some of the things that he wanted him to do or could have done, but one thing that appealed to him was to be director of the Development Loan Fund. And I think it was because he was a director of the Development Loan Fund that we were invited to this dinner party. And I sat next to John Foster Dulles and Radcliffe, who was the head of He was a military man. What was he? Somebody named Radcliffe. And I was out of my element. I really was. I didn't know what to say to those two men. You know, nothing I could say. I wasn't chatty. And so I was just very sweet and nice and didn't say much of anything. Other people talked, and I was there feeling a little bit helpless. But then there was dancing. Oh boy. And I said, oh, what am I going to do now? Frank was off somewhere sitting with somebody else. And so John Foster Dulles, who was the Secretary of State, and he was not very well, and he had a sore leg, I think. And he said, he was proper. He said, do you wish to dance? And I should have said no, thank you, but I didn't. So I danced with John Foster Dulles at a dinner party, and he plotted and plotted and plotted and plotted once more, and then we called it quits. After Frank was named chief judge, I think that's what it was, and so it was Bob Dole, who was it? Frank Ford.
Oh.
Ford was a who was a
Ford.
oh
President?
who
Was it in the
was
White House when you went to?
who was the vice president? Kennedy? No,
He didn't have
not
one.
Kennedy.
Ford didn't have one.
What? Frank Ford.
No.
Wasn't that
Gerald.
Gerald Ford?
Gerald
But
Ford.
he became president
When?
after Nixon resigned.
After who?
Nixon resigned.
So he
Oh.
didn't have a vice
Become-
president.
Oh yes.
He became
Okay. So he was
president.
so he became president. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so he thought it would be great to honor the judiciary. I don't know what made him think that way, but he did. And he invited the chief judges of all the circuits and their spouses. And we had a dinner at the White House. And it was, well, I'll tell you the story. And so we, of course, went. And the first thing, we had to find a place to stay while we were there. So we asked Bob Reich whether we could stay with them. And they agreed we could stay there, and he would take us to the White House. And so he took us to the White House that night. And unfortunately, he had a little Volkswagen Bug thing, and there was only 2 seats. And I had to get myself into the crawl space behind the 2 seats. And so I drove up to the White House, and there was a handsome young Marine dressed up like a Marine and officially with white gloves and to greet us. And so Frank got out and then turned around and made room for me to get out, and I had to crawl out, and I had to stand up straight and neaten my dress and hold up my head, and then I began, and this Marine offered me his arm, and I was escorted into the White House. And when we entered to the reception room, we were announced, and there I was in the White House, and it was a lot of people that I knew. They were other judges and so forth. Well, there were 100 people there, and I felt so comfortable. I mean, because we knew so many people, and so Frank had, when he talked to somebody, he he was thorough. And so we were the last ones when it was time to go into the dining room. This was the reception room where we was received by the president. And so Frank was talking with a friend of his who also, I forget who he was, but somebody he knew. And he was chatting with him and talking and talking and talking. And lo and behold, we were the last ones in the line. And so we went up to Gerald Ford and he said, "Frank, how are you? Oh, I'm glad to see you," because they knew each other when he was in the Congress. And so that was kind of nice to be welcomed like that by the president. During the cocktail hour, Justice Powell was there, and I chatted with him, and he said, "Did you know that the Foxes are expecting a baby?" And I thought to myself, I didn't know that, of course, and I was saying to myself, if this could have been at home? I just feel much at home because I even had gossip here.
Clearly, a big change came when the governor's race was open and he was asked to run
This was
for the 1960 election.
This was a difficult decision to make, whether he should run or not. He was very happy as a congressman and felt that he could certainly contribute to the Congress. But then he was torn because the state of Maine said that he was the one that could win most easily. And so finally he decided to give up his job with the Senate, with the Congress, and run for the governorship. And he put everything he had into that, and he wanted to do a thorough job of what he would do as a governor. And he had help from many people, especially Jean Sampson. She did a superb job of explaining what he had, what his program was to help the state of Maine continue to be grow and fare well. And so this made it. I think it made it. Well, it's a race that Frank lost, as we all know, and you wonder why, because he put so much knowledge into his platform and to what his achievements that he wanted to do. But you have to realize that it was the first time that the state of Maine was voting for president with every other state. Up until then, we had our September elections, and we were unique, and a lot of people didn't bother to go out and vote. But this time, it was a Catholic who was running for president, and the people up in Worcester County were all Republicans, and they weren't Catholics, and they didn't want to have a Catholic in the White House, and for a lot of reasons, they didn't pay attention to all the good work that Frank did in preparing a platform and a program. They were just, for some reason, they didn't win. They didn't vote for him. And so after it was over, President Kennedy called and said, "Frank, we got the vote out, but unfortunately you didn't get quite enough to make you win. But I'd like to have you in my administration, and so we'll see what we can do." And so that was very reassuring, because we were happy in Washington, and the fact that maybe we could stay in Washington for a little while longer made everyone in the family happy. And so we were content. But now the problem was, what was he going to do? What does they said? Do you want to be your representative to the United Nations? No, that means leaving Washington, and he wouldn't want that. And you want to be assistant secretary for congressional relationships? No, he's had enough of Congress. He didn't want that. And there were other things that they thought maybe he'd like to do. But finally, they said, how about, these were the people trying to find a place for him. They said, how about the Development Loan Fund, which is an organization that helps other countries. It's a fund, that fund-giving fund, so that we can help develop nations. And so that sounded pretty good. And so he said, yes, that's what I'd like to do. I've always been interested in helping other countries and aid to other countries. And so that's what he was appointed to do. And this was a kind of a nice job, because it was the head of an agency, and he had a chauffeur assigned to him. So he didn't have to drive the car downtown. He had his chauffeur to come. And so the first day he was made Development Loan Fund director, and the chauffeur came to the house and to pick him up. It was a snowy day, and we live on a slight incline, and the chauffeur, after he entered Frank into the car in the back, he started to go up the hill, and it wasn't easy. He was slipping back, and so he needed some help. So Frank got out of the rear of the car and went behind the car, and began to push. And he pushed. And so finally the car caught, and they were able to continue. So we thought to ourselves, the neighbors were looking for his going into a chauffeured drive. They must have had a chuckle to themselves. The Development Loan Fund existed, I don't know how long, a number of months. I don't think it was a year that he had that job, because President Kennedy wanted to combine the Development Loan Fund, which just takes care of the money. He wanted to combine that with the workers who were in the different countries. And I forget what that was called, but it was, and so he wanted to combine those two agencies and make it just one, USAID. And so that's what he did. And so the Development Loan Fund was no longer existing, and so he had to think of something else, because we still wanted to stay in Washington if we could. And finally, somehow, somebody suggested that there was an opening in Paris, France, with the development OECD, OECD was part of the merger, and it was going to be called OECD, Office of
Organization for Economic and Community Development.
Yes. And so that's what that appealed to him. The fact that we, as a family, could go to France was very appealing. And so, and he thought he would be a minister, which is a high position, and so we would be treated well, although that didn't matter so much, but he just knew that he would be in charge of something, and so we agreed to that. So that led to almost 2 years of being able to live in Paris, France, and it was a precious time for us as a family, and in many ways. And all of the children were happy there, except Susan. Susan, we thought she was young enough to learn the language and not have to worry about graduating and well, that isn't exactly what I want to say, but so she was the one that we sent to a école bilingue, which was teaching, helping English-speaking students learn in French, and she found it difficult, so she was not all that happy. But the others were at the American school in Paris, and all of their friends there were from other countries, and they mostly America, and so they could make friends easily, and they were taught in English, and Nancy was a senior. She was a junior when we went there, and so the next year when we were still there, she was off to college, and Douglas had been a sophomore, and then he was still there when we had to go, and we were there in Paris for 2 summers and 1 school year and 2 months, and that's how I like to think of it. And Douglas persuaded us that he didn't want to graduate from any other place but the American School of Paris, and so we said okay, and his the minister's wife agreed. She said they had plenty of extra rooms in the house that they had, and because they were used to taking in people in trouble, and so here was Douglas, and he was he had the minister and his wife for his host and hostess, and they left him pretty much alone. He wasn't overlooked. I mean, he wasn't treated with any great care, but he had a good time too, and he was glad to graduate. But we had rumors at the end of that summer, the second summer. There were rumors about an opening in the judgeship in the First Circuit Court of Appeals, and who was being thought of to be nominated, and Frank's name was coming up, and there was much discussion. And the only way we knew about this, Libby Donahue kept us up to date, and I forget who else, but mostly we've just heard it, and so that his name was being mentioned. And I remember when he first thought that this could be a reality, that he would be appointed to the federal court, the First Circuit Court of Appeals. He began to think about it, and he felt that, well, I've never thought of being a judge. Maybe he had it down a long time ago that he wanted to be a judge, but I think that must have been very perfunctory, because this time he really was considering it, and he thought to himself, oh, he could do that. He would love to do that, to really see how it's done and how important it is. And so that intrigued him, and he realized that he would love it. And so when he finally did they were sure of it. I guess he was really appointed, and he had to come to the U.S. to be sworn in. He came. He left Paris and came here and to Washington, and walked into the hearing room and wondering how this was going to go. And so the judge who was going to listen to his or swear him in said, "Good morning, Judge." And here he was, not even sworn in yet, but so it was kind of a fait accompli. And that shows you how different it is from today, when someone like Judge Kermit Lopez had to wait a year and a half or more before he could be confirmed. And I guess nobody gets it done as quickly as that. So that shows you how times have changed, how it changes. And then a whole new era opens up. While he was here in the U.S. to be confirmed, he decided to. He said, "Where should we live?" He asked Bailey Aldrich, the judge, and he said, "Do I look for a place somewhere here in Boston?" He didn't know that as a judge from the state of Maine, he could live in Maine and be in Portland. And so he realized then that he didn't have to leave Maine. We could stay right here in Portland. He knew so little about it. And so he came up to Maine, and Sidney Wernick, one of our dear friends, and I guess other people helped him too to decide. They contacted a realtor to see what housing there would be in Maine, in Portland, for him, and he saw 3 houses. One of them was a split-level house in Broad Cove up in Cape Elizabeth, and another one was a downtown house on the Western Promenade that looked very much like one Mountain Avenue that we were living in, with an alley in the back and a garage in the back and front, anyway. So that, and then he had another one, and this one he took pictures of, and this one was on the water, and it overlooked the harbor, and the only trouble was it didn't look very well cared for. There was charcoal all over the fireplace, and that hadn't been cleaned, and there was a hole in the middle of the linoleum in the kitchen, and the painting needed to be painted, and the floors were shabby, and so he didn't know whether that would please me. But he came back to France, and he showed me those pictures, and he showed me the other 2 houses, or told me about the other 2 houses, and I said to him, "You mean you're debating about this? Well, what's wrong with that? Let's take the house with the view." And so he agreed, of course. I think he was teasing me, bringing the other 2, because this was absolutely, well, we just can't believe our luck. Really, really, really. Because it's been a joy every minute. It's a well-built house, and it has 5 bedrooms, and every one has there's 6 bedrooms, because the upstairs and the attic was made. They were rooms that could have been used for bedrooms, and then 5 bedrooms on the second floor, each one with a bathroom, as you all know. And we were happy. And when we got here, Nancy wasn't here, Douglas wasn't here, Meredith and Susan were the only two. We had a pleasant boat ride home. It was a tour boat, and so we were well ready for the new experience of this house. Feeling the state of Maine made us feel good too. And then we saw the house for the first time, and there was a slight snowfall. So Susan wrote on the porch in the snow, "I am so happy," because she was the only one who really was happy. And Meredith didn't want to say goodbye to all her friends in France, but she soon got acclimated, and we've had a wonderful life here. And the best part of the life here was having law clerks to come, a fresh batch every year, and each one precious. And it was very easy to think of things to do with them and entertain them. They were part of the family, and I always felt that coming to Portland and being with the judge gave them an insight, a valuable insight into helping them do what they were intended to do, to be good judges.